Okay, welcome to the finals. Jesse Martin versus Eric Dupuis. TPS versus the Young Americans. Uh,
Yeah, I was not thrilled with this matchup. I always enjoy playing Jesse. He's about as good an opponent as I can hope for. Would have liked to have been armed with Grixis here, but the Young Americans certainly put to the limit against a deck like TPS. Controlling the board really doesn't matter here, and that's really what Young Americans is good at, is handling small creature decks and handling other Dark Confidant-based control decks. Jesse completely eschews the Dark Confidant plan for all the most broken draw engines in Vintage, such as Time Twister, Necro, Bargain. So my cards like Lightning Bolt are absolutely terrible here.
yeah, Jesse's just, I mean, his plan is good versus just about everybody. TPS is like a samurai sword. It's just been like honed and refined down to perfection. And Jesse's been playing it the whole way. He doesn't really switch it up too much. I mean, the biggest change I've ever seen him make was he splashed green for what's that snake? The land drop snake that makes
Lotus
mana.
Cobra.
Lotus Cobra. And he did really well with it at a Waterbury tournament.
Was that a Gush version though?
Might have been a Gush version.
I've seen that. Yeah, it's certainly technology that was tried out. Anytime we get a new card like that, Vintage players like to see what they can do with it. I suspect that's what we'll see at the upcoming Vintage Championships with some of the new Commander cards. There's the new Merfolk, True Name Nemesis. He's going to be a card that's in demand. He's a Jace killer for sure,
yep.
And he definitely, it's hard to block, hard to get past. And then there's the new Wrath effect. Could be good enough to main deck. I mean, it answers literally every single creature ever. It costs you a lot of life to handle a Blightsteel, but there's not a lot of cards that can be said to answer both Dark Confidant and Blightsteel.
Yeah.
And
for 3 mana.
Team. Yeah, I mean, it gets rid of a whole team of Pyromancer tokens for only 1 life.
I also like the double white X spell.
Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
The double white, I think, will prohibit it from being in the current control list.
Right.
Something like Oliver's Bomberman may be able to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Because that's just a heavy blue-white. But similar to Balance, it's a really powerful effect that control decks might even want to have, but they just can't go into a 4th or 5th color. Especially a double white for this new one.
Mm-hmm. Definitely in Legacy in the Death and Taxes list.
I could definitely see it being played there. Submerged sees a lot of play in that format.
Yeah.
And this handles everything. So
could do it in response to a Stoneforge trigger.
Yes. Yeah, in response to fetch lands. Even just as a tempo play, it's a fine card. Alright, so I open up on Library. That's helpful. Really, to win this matchup, I'm going to need a lot of counters and a clock. That's really... Everything's going to have to come together. So I have...
Jesse's taking a peek. You don't have a force. You have a force, but you don't have a force.
Yeah, that's typical with this deck. It's really unfortunate. The blue count is not really high enough to consistently rely off of hitting even a blue card off of a Jace activation.
Yeah.
There's times where I don't even want to run out of Jace because I've got force in Jace, and I know my opponent has a card that can kill me. So that's definitely awkward.
So Jesse has an opportunity here to, I mean, if he can get a turn 1 right now, then, you really have nothing to say about it.
Yeah, the door is wide open. My Deathrite Shamans aren't going to do anything there. So he has to pass the turn.
Doesn't even play lands.
Yeah, looks like a weak keep then. So I'm going back up to 7 cards in hand here. I'm going to be able to tap to draw and drop a land, and then I have Vampiric Tutor open. I believe I also had a Deathrite in there, so I've got some options here. That's a really strong opening.
Jesse must have like a Lotus Petal or something, or a Black Lotus. Otherwise, I can't see keeping a no-lander. So the Deathrite going.
Walking away from Library. That seems weak. That seems weak here. So what I'm going to be able to look at is Vampiric Tutor for Ancestral EndStep.
Mm-hmm.
And then hope to resolve the Ancestral and get back up to Library. We'll see if that's too greedy here. He definitely missed his land drop. There's a strong chance that he's sitting on counter spells. Unlikely that he's sitting on a bunch of really good stuff he can cast. I don't think he'd be any way that he could possibly be doing that. So
Yeah. I mean, really, he only needs single counter backup. I mean, or even a duress would probably be enough.
yeah, I think he just doesn't have it at this point. That seems to be the case. So
yeah, if he had it, you'd have been dead.
So yeah,
going to discard.
He doesn't even have blue mana.
And you are not going for the Ancestral on the end step.
Well, yeah, when they're gonna go to discard there,
yeah,
you
true.
just
You
let
have
them
to...
discard. It's much better. The Deathrite's going to allow me to cast the Ancestral anyways, so just not worth it. If he has a force, there he would have forced and then not had to discard. I would have been down a card. I don't think that's worth the extra tempo. You know, it's really, it's going to be a war of attrition a lot of the time. Yep. So
no, it's a solid argument.
Would have been nice to be able to get something like Tinker. That would have been totally fine. I believe I did draw a blue card off of the either the draw step or the library activation. So were I on Grixis, this turn would have looked like Tinker Blightsteel with force backup. Instead, the Vamp pretty much has to find Ancestral as it's the best option.
Hmm.
So we've got Ancestral, and that's got to almost certainly get some kind of reaction from Jesse.
Well, he doesn't have Mental Misstep in the main, so is it worth 2 cards? It is. So that just reinforces your reasoning for letting him discard. Yeah. I didn't see what he pitched, but couldn't have been that great.
Yeah, it does not play well with library, though. That whole line at this point doesn't hold up. Walking away from library. So basically I went down a card off of Vampiric Tutor, and then I'm down a card off of activating library, and then this is the third time that I would have activated library. So if I had just stayed the course, I already would have the Ancestral level card advantage, and be in a better shape down the line because I still have the Vamp in hand at that point.
Yeah. Well, right now you're representing Force of Will, which he knows you have.
Yeah, it's...
But you didn't have... yeah, there are no lands in graveyards, so you did have to play the Mox. Making him lose some life.
Yeah, at this point I'm trying to ride Deathrite to victory. Maybe get back up to 7 cards. Yeah, every turn that goes by, I should be outdrawing him 2-1. So this game was definitely winnable with a more conservative line, which, you know, if I was more familiar with it, I can't fault the deck for this one. This is definitely on me for being a little too aggressive with that Vamp. And the Ancestral is really not that good in this deck by comparison. It's not like I'm an Ancestral into Tinker Blightsteel or Vault Key, or I mean, it's really just not that good that it's worth.
And you don't even have a Snapcaster to flash it back.
The difference between getting 3 cards right now or 3 cards over the next 3 turns in this deck, it's really not that significant. So yeah, that looks like it's going to be a very important part of this matchup is walking away from that library. When your opponent opens up with a no-lander and you have library, there's got to be some possibly some issues with the deck, but certainly issues with the decisions made. Yeah, looking over the just so many creatures in my list, and not having them right now actually is kind of a problem.
Yeah,
it would be nice to have a creature or 2 out there beyond the Deathrite to really put some pressure on.
So Jesse having a land seems like he's kind of given himself way more options now. I mean, as far as setting up, he got to brainstorm. Looks like he might preordain or something, or ponder.
Yeah, if he can cantrip himself into an explosive play with with backup, or just 2 explosive plays. Either way, I'm going to be in bad shape. I'm not getting any extra cards over him right now. It looks like I have 4 cards in hand. That's a mile away from library activations.
Yeah.
So we'll see what he's able to do. But he knows that I have it.
He just goes for the Dark Ritual. What, are you going to force it? And now he has Duress. Oh, Necro.
He just runs the Necro out there.
You pretty much, like, if you don't force the Necro, you don't counter anything. Because he's gonna just get himself up to a perfect selection.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. So I am going to use the force. I'm not going to tap out to play it. I'm going to pitch Jace, and that was incorrect.
Yeah.
I'm trying to send the signal
that you have another force.
That I have another force. I felt like the only reason he would go with that Necro in that way is if he had another play. I was definitely overthinking it.
Yeah, Necro was probably just the less important play. I mean, he used 2 cards, you used 2 cards. But yeah, you were thinking, I understand when you're thinking, like, if you just turn off your Force of Will, then you're basically F6ing, and a good Storm player can easily recognize an F6.
Yeah, I probably could have sold it as tapping out for the first force. If that was the message I wanted to send, I probably could have done enough acting to really send that it's like, not only can I just tap out for this force, but I've got force plus blue card in hand.
So he knows that one of your cards is Ancient Grudge, and that's the only other card he knows about.
Yeah, Ancient Grudge has been...
So he's not going to be playing with Chrome Mox anytime soon.
Unless it's going to win for him.
Unless it's going to win the game.
Not just going to throw it out there for giggles. The mismanagement of library is definitely the story of this game. Deathright's doing his best, but 6 more turns is a long, long time in Vintage.
Yeah.
Yeah, without having any of his friends here, is just too much for him to carry.
What do you think about, Jesse? Think about Ancestral Recall. You're going to pay the mana for a misstep, because you don't want to add 2 Storm.
Yeah, and at that point I'm still representing Force of Will by keeping the 5 mana up. Just draw go from my side of the table here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've certainly been able to stop him from doing what he needs to do.
Well, it seems like he's pretty bottlenecked as far as mana goes. And Yawgmoth's Will isn't really going to be good for him this game.
Depends on how much acceleration he has, really.
Yeah.
If he's got enough. Deathright's only hitting 1 card at a time, so a couple of rituals, Yawgmoth would be a reasonable card. I am only at 16. There's no creatures in the graveyard for me to gain life off of.
Yeah. Storm of 2. 2 black floating. So 5 mana all day.
Let's see where this goes. Probably not a good place for Team Young Americans. And Cabal Ritual with 6 in the graveyard.
Okay.
Yeah, just verifying that it's only the +1. Yep. So he's got...
Going up to 6 mana.
Yep. 4 black, 2 colorless.
That's a bargain.
That is a bargain or a Yogg will, either way. Either one of those would be a problem.
Bargain being...
I'd rather have bargain, honestly.
The straw... Well, at 10 life, bargain is dangerous when you have no mana, but he hasn't made a land drop either.
Yeah. Well, it's effectively 8 life because of the Pyromancer, the Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's 7 new cards. The Yawgmoth's Will, there's more than 7 cards in there, so...
Considering all possibilities. So far we got a storm of 3.
And there's the Will.
Yep.
So I've got to nab something before Yogg Will.
Probably the Dark Ritual. Because
he's got
it's better than
3
the
black.
Claw Ritual.
He has 3 black floating right now, so mana might not be the issue.
He's got, yeah, 3 black floating, yeah.
It's an interesting situation.
Maybe the Cataxian Probe. But...
Probe's possible. I think he's got a land in there. I could hit the land with the Deathrite.
Looks like... Make the decision. Storm of 4.
Yeah, 3 more spells plus the tendrils would be lethal. So if he has the tendrils in hand, just Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, and Probe is more than enough.
Yep.
Or is exactly enough.
I mean, Jesse knew you had the Deathrite, so it probably doesn't matter too much which card you take. You take the Brainstorm. I agree with that, because if he drops a blue source, probes, then brainstorms, then ritual, that's the most amount of cards.
Yeah, because he had 3 black. Cabal Ritual would have been 4.
So now he's up to 5 black.
So there's no way of disrupting that.
5 black, Storm of 5. Six black, Storm of 6. Demonic Tutor for tendrils. Get there.
Yeah, 6 black. He's got the extra land, so it could even be Grim Tutor.
Yep. Wow, that's an upgrade since last time I've seen Jesse play. Got a black bordered Underground Sea now. Before he had all unlimited
with altars on them.
Yeah, so now he's just pushing it as far as it'll go. He's got the white bordered Necro, but I think it's Japanese.
Probe.
He's just paying mana for Probe.
Yep, just showing.
Oh yeah, he knew about Lightning Bolts as well.
Yeah, Snapcaster at any point would have been nice.
Mm-hmm. More mana. 7 mana, Storm of 7. No, Storm of 8.
Oh, and he had the tendrils.
Yep.
Gross. So with him having the tendrils already, getting the Dark Ritual. Nope. Because he ended at 7 mana. That would have just got rid of 2 of them. And he had the Chrome Mox, so he could have ended up with +1 card in hand, and then that would have been an additional mana anyways. So it doesn't look like there was any way I could have done that differently in terms of that final sequence. Of course, overall, it definitely would have been a completely different game had I been able to ride library effectively.
Yeah. So I imagine you're taking out some number of lightning bolts.
Yeah, Bolt's just so bad in this matchup. Bolt's an absolute mess. The main deck there's a Nile Spellbomb that's gonna hopefully do some work. From the original list, we're down Grape Shot, Gataxian Probe, and Cabal Therapy. Those are all the cute cards that were tested out. Ultimately, not really worth it. In the sideboard now, we're looking at Abrupt Decay, and Grafdigger's Cage is the bulk of the sideboard, mostly because of how bad the Oath matchup is. And then you have some access to Nature's Claim, as well as Pithing Needles and some more Graveyard Hate. So not a lot of good options here. Pretty much just try and hedge against the graveyard strategies. It wouldn't be unreasonable to bring in Pithing Needle to try and stop like Necro or Bargain, but it's a coin toss. It's really not. It's just not really where you want to be. I think I'd probably even rather have a Lightning Bolt over a Pithing Needle in that matchup without knowing what's actually in their hand. That would be an argument in favor of like Gataxian Probe. Like if I probed and saw a Bargain, okay, that works. But just to have to guess offhand, I'm almost always going to have to guess Necro at that point, which is not necessarily worth the card. And a lot of the times they'll be tutoring for the Necro anyways, so they just won't tutor for Necro. It really doesn't change the lines significantly enough to make it worth it. At that point, they can just tutor for anything else that would beat you.
So Jesse's definitely going to bring in, I think, Defense Grid in this matchup.
Yeah, Defense Grid would be fine. I have Ancient Grudge. This is a scrappy list. I'll give it that. You don't want to dirtle around against it. You want to just beat it. They can definitely hang in there. Versus the Time Vault key decks that I've played against, there's been a bunch of matches where they've gotten a big advantage, and then I just beat them because I Ancient Grudge, and then get rid of their Jace and just kind of claw my way back into the game. So it is scrappy. Defense Grid wouldn't be unreasonable. It's probably better than some of the artifact bounce. But yeah, I think Probe would probably be the type of card you'd want versus this deck. It both speeds you up and lets you know what kind of jank you're going to be playing against on the other side of the table, because you don't know. Like, you just like, does he have a hand with 3 lightning bolts? Like, can I go this route or not?
Right.
So there's definitely something to be said for the power of Probe here, both in terms of speed and information. And you don't need your island. I really don't have any permanents you need to get rid of. Mental Misstep is definitely a card I'd want to have here. It's going to stop a lot of my disruption in my explosive plays. So,
yep.
When I say explosive, I mean like turn 1 Deathrite Shaman. It's not really that crazy. I don't know that you misstep that necessarily, but at least you have the option.
Yeah. I mean, I think you definitely. I think the Cripple's Recall, the rebuild. Yeah. Because it's not going to be not a good enough reason to keep it in there. It doesn't have duality. Probably cuts his Chrome Mox.
Yeah.
And maybe like 1 Preordain, or maybe 1 Force of Will.
I would leave the forces in. I don't think he needs to over sideboard versus me. My deck is really not that strong. I think he knows that after seeing the Deathrite Shaman. He knows I'm not on Grixis. So, were I playing Grixis, I think it's a completely different thing. I think you definitely bring in Defense Grid, and I think you definitely bring in the missteps. Like that's definite, and you probably bring in the probes. And at that point, you're really looking at getting rid of your artifact bounce, and then that's about it. Maybe you can't even bring all of that in because Grixis has a much more counter heavy suite, so Defense Grid is much better versus Grixis.
Now, this is the first 7 I've seen Jesse keep.
Yeah, he was talking with me after the tournament. He felt much better about mulliganing and like actually looking for hands that can win. That last hand certainly wasn't a case of that. That was a very questionable keep and easily could have been punished. But in general, he's felt much better about mulliganing which is a good sign. You want to, going into a big tournament, feel comfortable with your deck and trust that it's going to get there. Similar to, when I'm looking at an early Ancestral, really feeling like this is the correct line. Because there are times with Grixis where you can go for a turn 2 Tinker or a turn 2 Ancestral, and there are a lot of times where the Ancestral is correct. You only get to that play when you feel like the deck is good enough. Like when you're just like, oh, a Tinker's, that's just got to be better. It's like, no, my deck's so good that 3 random cards are going to be better than Tinker, especially, when you have a Snapcaster and stuff, and you're going to be able to reuse it. But that only comes from getting the reps in and really understanding the power level. And certainly, like with the Young Americans list, if there was a Tinker, I would just Tinker. Like I'd just the reusing of the Ancestral in this list without the Pyromancer out is nowhere near where you really want to be.
So Jesse opted not to run an Ancestral out. I started thinking about it, and he opted to just pass the turn. I mean, he's got a full grip, so an Ancestral, he probably wants a turn where he can make another land drop.
Yeah, there may be concern about using it to create a counter war. It could be trying to throw it out there as bait and not counter back, but counter over the next thing.
Yeah.
All sorts of possibilities with Storm Ancestrals. The better the deck, the better Ancestral is. Ancestral's really good when you take like a Rug Delver deck from Legacy and throw in Ancestral. It gets much better, but the power level is nowhere near it is compared to like a TPS deck where you can Ancestral into just things that kill your opponent on the spot in an uncounterable way almost.
Right.
Alright, so we got that.
Got some mana.
Mana Crypt.
Mox
4.
Jet.
Plenty of mana.
So he could run out an Ancestral and still have like a Dark Ritual plan.
Yeah, we'll see where this goes. I feel like I did not have the strong type of opening that I would have liked.
Yeah.
I
missing land drops.
I think I had a single land and really needed to hit a land in the first 2 turns there.
Discarding the Ancient Grudge.
Yeah. And then, so I believe I've got some counters in hand, thinking that I'm going to go for some mana denial during the upkeep. These are the type of lines that this type of deck needs to take, where you're actually going after their mana sources with stuff like Ancient Grudge and trying to mana screw them. But they really work best when you've got creatures on board. There's no doubt about that.
So now you taking the black or the 2?
I think I go with the 2.
Yeah. So now he's got the option of, I mean, you're basically just on Force. I mean, you could potentially have double Force, but...
Yeah, Force and Misstep.
Oh, Misstep, right. I keep forgetting that you can play that ridiculous card in this format. I'm just so used to Legacy.
It is so good. Let's see what I go with for counters here. No, I've got to force that. That's a disaster. So I remember my hand accurately now. If I hit my second blue source, I would have had Force and Drain on the second turn, which is where I wanted to be. And the thought process was, worst case scenario, I discard the Ancient Grudge and am able to flash back and try and bottleneck him on mana.
So now he's got a resolved Ancestral. I know he has a Ritual in hand.
And like a million spells have been played now, because I did the Ancient Grudge and we just fought over that.
Yep.
So it's already 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much anything that would get him to casting Tendrils is probably going to be lethal. Like a few Rituals and a Demonic, and we're gone.
He's got a Time Walk.
And he's got to make a land drop if he's going to use the Time Walk.
Getting ritualistic.
Yeah, pretty clear that I don't have a misstep.
Yeah, you would have definitely misstepped the Ancestral rather than force it. DT with a black floating.
Probably expecting Lotus here.
Yeah, I could see that. And then Yogwill.
Yogwill would be lethal.
Yeah.
Yogwill, if he has Yogwill in hand, it's Lotus, replay Lotus, Ritual, Mana Crypt, and that actually works directly in his favor because it gives him extra Storm off of the Ancient Grudge. 2 extra Storm. So that Ancient Grudge proves to be nothing but helping Jesse if he does get Lotus here and has Yogwill in hand. Of course, we'd expect that he'd be getting Lotus here instead of Yogwill, because if he had the Lotus, it would more than likely already be in play.
Right. So right now, Jesse in a very comfortable, very familiar situation where he's just sort of going through the motions at this point. He's still a very careful player, so he's going to take his time to consider all his options, but I think we might start seeing him just sort of throw cards on the table.
Yeah, barring a card like Fairy Macabre, this is over. With the Yogwill. There's not a lot that can really interrupt there.
Yep, and there it is. So, and he's still floating a black, so maybe he... It doesn't matter what color he got.
Oh, Surgical.
There's something.
And he's got the misstep.
Yep.
No. Well, a little bit of sneakiness on my side of the table there. That actually could have been pretty good.
Yeah.
If I hit the DT there, then his Yogwill would have been good, but not lethal.
Right.
So that would have been really, really exceptional. So shows a little bit again why I kept that. I think there was a decent amount of disruption. And I really felt like I needed to get lucky to win this matchup anyways, and the luck needed to be in the form of hitting my land drop. So basically I had 3 different things to interact with them there. The Force, the Surgical, and the Ancient Grudge. Hoping any of those would add up to be significant enough.
Yeah. Jesse just having all the answers.
Yeah, having the misstep there is absolutely huge. Because otherwise it's Ancestral and Ritual and hope that you find the Tendrils. If not, you've got to pass the turn.
And then you get rid of your Yawgmoth's Will, which is like one of your whole routes to victory.
Yeah, I mean it'd still be very easy for him to rebuild from there.
Yep.
But what do we? We just got the DT for the Tendrils
DT
here.
for Tendrils.
Yeah, he has the Force in the bin. If he's got a blue card in his hand, there's nothing that can possibly
showing you. And Jesse Martin taking down. Oh, so what did you have? You had a Young Pyromancer, a Bob, a Bolt, and a Snap. Oh, you are playing Snapcaster in this list.
Oh yeah. I mean, it goes with Skull Clamp, but those guys, they always end up hanging out together. There's just so many creatures, and that's part of the issue with the deck. Is it does get bottlenecked on creatures at times. Other times you're not drawing them when you need them. But you only need so many creatures on board. Like the difference in between having 2 guys on board or having 3 guys on board and having another counter in your hand. Like the Grixis list is much more capable of riding that line of beating down, and that's like Plan C of Grixis. Like you're looking at maybe even Plan D. Like you've got Time Vault Key, Tinker Blight Steel, Jace, Wizard Beats. Whereas Young Americans is literally Wizard Beats the whole way. So definitely a much tougher matchup versus TPS. I was able to play Jesse on Monday. I got the match from him there playing Grixis. So a lot of interesting choices for people going into Vintage Champs. I'd hope they'd consider Jesse's list if they've got a lot of experience with Storm. There's the Oath list, Grixis, Bomberman. Lots of choices for the Blue Mages, and of course we still have all of the Workshop and Dredge and aggro strategies out there. So I'm expecting it to be a pretty wild metagame. We'll see what people brew up.
Yep. Well, I'd like to congratulate Jesse Martin on his victory. This is definitely not his first time winning a Vintage tournament, and I'm sure it won't be his last. I want to wish all the Vintage players out there good luck if you're planning on playing Vintage Champs. I want to thank Dave Tassinari over at Scholars Bookstore and Games for hosting this event, Eric Dupuis for organizing and doing tournament reports, and all you play the end step for making this all possible, and all you players out there for watching and supporting us. We couldn't be doing this without you guys, so we really appreciate that.
All right, thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you guys again.